Welcome to NTC Now, where we explore the frontier of nature tech, i.e. the technologies and solutions accelerating our path to a nature-positive future. I'm Paige, and each week we bring together innovators, experts, and change makers who are harnessing technology to protect, restore, and regenerate our natural world. So whether you're building nature tech solutions, looking to adopt them, or curious about how technology can serve nature, this is your space to learn, connect, collaborate. So earlier this month, we laid the groundwork by exploring what nature tech is and why it's crucial for a transition to a nature-positive economy. Today, we're bringing those concepts to life through a fascinating case study in the rugged Scottish Highlands that demonstrates how nature tech works in practice. We're privileged to have with us three key players that make any successful nature tech project possible: the solution provider, the project developer, and the investor. So Sylvain Vaquer from Mozaic Earth, Dr. Max Bodmer from rePLANET, and Helge Hansen from Foresight Group. They'll walk us through their partnership, why they're transforming how they're transforming the way we monitor and measure biodiversity. And so what makes this case study particularly valuable is how it showcases the power of collaboration to overcome traditional barriers in nature tech adoption. Through innovative use of smartphones and AI, they've managed to make biodiversity monitoring more accessible, scalable, and cost-effective, all while maintaining scientific rigor. So, to explain this in their own words, I'd like to first invite Helge Hansen to kick us off by introducing himself and sharing what drove Foresight Group to initiate and partake in this project. Helge, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Paige, for inviting me to join this panel discussion today. So a quick background about the Foresight Group. So we are an international investment manager, and we're headquartered in London, and we focus on green energy transition, decarbonized infrastructure, and natural capital. In total, we manage 14 billion of assets, and a relatively small part at the moment of that sits in natural capital. So we launched our Foresight Natural Capital Fund 1 about 3 years ago, and that is now 300 million pounds invested. And this is still growing. And we've, as part of the first fund, we mainly invested in forestry, and that is existing forestry and afforestation projects in the UK, predominantly in Scotland. And we've also invested some of that money in regenerative agriculture. We have just sort of completed pre-marketing stages for the Foresight Natural Capital Fund 2, which will be a European fund. And we have the target is to raise 500 million euros by the end of 2025. And that will deploy it in a slightly wider remit, so going beyond forestry. So we're looking into peatland restoration projects and other opportunities just beyond forestry. But forestry will still play probably a key part in that business. So obviously, biodiversity and how to measure biodiversity is very important for us as a fund manager, and because we need to understand really what impacts our management activities have on nature. The credits of that is basically only one sort of point why we are really interested in monitoring biodiversity. We are, as a fund manager, we are regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, and that comes with sort of sustainability disclosure requirements. So building that platform helps also to fulfill those requirements. So it's not just about we want to monetize on the credits. We have reporting requirements, and that is quite important to get that across. And also we have reporting obligations towards our shareholders. You know, they invest money and they want to make sure that our impacts are measured. And then almost like at the moment, the credits is almost in third place, I would say, because it is an evolving market. But the first 2 points I made, that is equally important to us. When I joined Foresight about 1.5 years ago, we explored different standards, metrics, and how to best capture our impacts. And as a go-to tool, we used the statutory biodiversity metric and did quite a bit of work and tweaking around how this can be adjusted for the forestry sector, in particular for Foresight. But we soon found that sort of it has its limitation, and we really need to dig a bit deeper and get more granularity what is actually happening on the ground and with the land that we manage.
So I'm Max Bodmer from rePLANET, and I think it's always good to describe what rePLANET is because it's a little bit difficult to define, but I think we would generally describe ourselves as a mission-led project developer, and that really means that our core aim is to stimulate landscape scale nature restoration and recovery of ecosystems. We work on a fairly global basis, so we have quite a lot of projects that are running in the UK, but then we also have projects that are running globally. Over quite a lot of projects in Latin America, some other projects in Europe. Sylvain and I actually met in Romania for the first time on one of our projects over there, so we've got quite a global footprint as well. And the way in which we engage with the private sector is through the generation of credits. So that's predominantly carbon and biodiversity credits. I think it's fair to say in terms of the world of carbon, we don't do anything that's particularly innovative. We kind of just fall in line with where the market is going. Where we are innovating is on the biodiversity side of things. So we are the caretakers of the Wallacea Trust methodology, which Helge has mentioned here and is quite relevant to the conversation we're going to be having today. So the Wallacea Trust methodology is one of a handful of methodologies that is now being quite widely adopted for quantifying biodiversity gains associated with natural capital projects globally. And it basically involves measuring 5 different groups that encompass, so this is 5 different species groups or habitat classes that encompass the conservation objectives of a particular project. And so we basically, in all of our projects, have to make sure that we have really high level and high integrity biodiversity monitoring. But I'm sure everyone on this call is aware of the very high costs associated with biodiversity monitoring. And we are kind of approaching people, telling them that they've got to invest a huge amount in their biodiversity monitoring before they can even begin to try and kind of generate credits that are going to be able to fund their nature restoration activities. So at rePLANET, the problem that we are ultimately trying to solve for is trying to reduce the costs of biodiversity monitoring so that organizations like Foresight and people like Helge can adopt the technology widely across the portfolio without it having massive impacts on budgets. So that's how we kind of first were working with Helge, with a view to helping him create a baseline for biodiversity at various different sites, all up in Scotland, using the Wallacea Trust methodology.
And that was on a large scale Scottish Highland estate, like sort of 2,500 hectares. And obviously a lot of on the ground work goes into capturing the baseline, and sort of quite far on during that project. One day Max said, "Oh, we've got this interesting company, Mozaic Earth, that have developed like a mobile app to capture data quickly and not necessarily with trained ecologists in the field." And obviously, with a large portfolio, that opportunity that presented to us was quite compelling, because if you can reduce the time and use like a wider workforce of people, that could be forest managers who capture data who are on site anyway, so we don't have to send specially trained ecologists to the site. So that is a compelling argument why we saw, let's see what this opportunity is about.
I'm Sylvain. I'm the CEO of a mighty little biodiversity monitoring venture called Mozaic Earth, where what we're trying to do, like our mission, is to transform the way people and businesses understand and interface with nature. And to do that, we combine on one side sheer cutting edge technology innovation, but more importantly, we combine this with community engagement to really make site level nature data more affordable, more accessible, and more editable for the partners we work with. Through discussion, we'll talk a little bit about different aspects of the platform, but one way to think about it is that through the Mozaic environment, we connect really 3 important stakeholder groups. we've got our on-site data collectors that use a really intuitive mobile application to collect precise geolocated imageries across natural sites, and or use the same app to geoposition traps and sensors in the right location and manage them. The other group is like we find the best ecologists and specialists to remotely interpret and verify the data that is collected and processed through the Mozaic platform from anywhere in the world, and obviously in this digital environment in a fraction of the time. And then we bring all of those complex biodiversity analyses that are done by the experts and increasingly by models, and simplify it to provide a digestible and actionable set of insights and insight dashboards to our clients. When Max originally and the team at rePLANET came to us, we've kind of like this challenge, like how do we balance offering high integrity, scientifically robust frameworks and methodology, but also with in a cost-effective way. This is where we started working together. We did a small pilot in Romania where I met Max for the first time to try to demonstrate that, yes, we could reduce the cost without lowering the bar of expectations in terms of science rigor. Also demonstrating like we can make those more robust methodologies scalable, because traditionally, as Helge mentioned, like this has been quite resource intensive. You need to send a lot of different type of expertise on site, but now we can centralize that expertise, do more work, and bring the complexity in the digital backroom, and then really simplify and increase the access for people that need to participate on site, but also people that need to make better decisions, like Helge and the Foresight team that don't necessarily have they're not experts ecologists. So it's really important to simplify the complex.
An idea, we have about 80 sites in the UK that we sort of manage, and how do we pick 2 sites? So we picked one site called Knockfell, which has a potential for a peatland restoration project, which we actually just started the other week. So that is a more natural capital, nature recovery project for us. And then on the other hand, we picked another site which is slightly more commercial as a fund. A key target for us is also the production of sustainable timber. So commercial tree species have a key role to play for us as well. So we picked 2 different projects, one more nature focused and one more on the sustainable production of timber, just to see, what different results and how this methodology works for us. And then when we started the survey work, it was actually very, very good, because people from Foresight came, myself attended, Sylvain was there, and some of our forest managers who actually managed the site. So we all met on site and did data collection. So that was a really good start to the project. And then colleagues of Max, they did like high imagery drone survey work, and I think that was independent from that site visit. But maybe Max is best placed to give a quick introduction of what the site conditions actually are.
Yeah, so the sites are, I mean, they're fairly homogenous. So they're basically kind of upland habitats that are dominated by peat and bogland, peat and bog. Really, really rugged. I mean, as Helge mentioned that, I've actually not been to the site. I know Sylvain has as well, and I think from what I've heard of the experiences that people have had there, it's pretty rugged terrain, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. Quite hefty access requirements, and no mean feat to be able to go out there and do the biodiversity monitoring work. But
you've got really like 1, 2, 3, 4 key steps in doing a project like this. The first one is kind of like the original planning desk work that you do very closely in collaboration with Helge and his team to establish the objectives of the project, like making sure we all drive towards the same goal. And then Max and his team would establish, like, from an ecological standpoint, what are the metrics that we need to monitor for those types of biomes. So in that case, we monitored the habitat structure of the environment following like the DEFRA methodology that is that is used in England. We applied it to a Scottish site. In that case, we monitored the plant diversity of the site. We monitored breeding birds through bioacoustic devices, and we monitored pollinator diversity and detritivore, so like ground level beetles and insects, to try to get a really full holistic representation of the site. And so that initial work setting what the framework is for those particular biome, and then associated with this, the sampling strategy is super important. Then step 2 is the data collection, which I'll talk about a little bit. Step 3, the data interpretation, that comes shortly after, or sometimes in conjunction. And then at the end, it's kind of like bringing all of this into a set of compelling insights from which then back to Helge and the team, we can make key decisions about land management plan. How do we adjust to planting strategies? How do we optimize our revenue value generation targets with conservation and impact kind of KPIs? So this is kind of like the flow.
There are two kind of tangible outputs from this. I mean, really, from rePLANET's perspective, the main output that we have provided to Foresight is a pretty comprehensive report that is pulling together what we're calling we're not calling it, it is a T0 pre-intervention baseline. So it's basically an assessment of those 5 groups that I mentioned at the start, and it's basically saying what the situation is on the sites at this point in time, with a view to, if Foresight then implements their new land management strategy at one of these sites, we can go back in, you can go back in 2, 3, 4 years time, whatever that interval is, do the same assessments again, and then basically do direct comparisons between your different species groups, so that you can see what the percentage uplift in biodiversity is. At its core, that's what we're doing. There is then a way for that percentage uplift between those different groups to be turned into credits and monetized, but as Helge says, that's not really the main. It's not really the main aim of what we're doing, but it is a possibility to take that on to that next step. So the output is really a report, and if people are interested, we've put together a mock report that is just made up of fictional data. It's a fictional site that really kind of shows the process from kind of the top of the process to the bottom of the process. I'm very happy to share that with people so you can see what the outputs are from a process like this. The other output, I'm going to throw it over to Sylvain, because that's probably the more jazzy thing that is actually much more kind of user-friendly than the output that we put together.
As I mentioned in the beginning, kind of like for Helge and his team, we put together like a dashboard that aggregates all of the interpreted insights at a metric level. So in the case of this project, we could say there were like 112 species of plants identified and 38 species of breeding birds identified across 9 very specific and distinct habitats across the 320 hectare, I think it was Knockfell. So all of these information at a species level are aggregated. Then they are processed using the calculations and methodology set out by the Wild Australia Trust methodology to get into an index, so a biodiversity index associated with the baseline at T0. And then this information, based on the work that the rePLANET team is doing, we put a narrative. So in the dashboard, we try to explain what does it mean in terms of land management plan, how to interpret those metrics to make better decisions. What sits underneath, so that's kind of like the front end kind of like environment where Helge can go and see what the results of the baseline are and then interrogate the data. But underneath, from a flow perspective, if we take the example of the plant surveys that we did, we actually have access to all of the primary data collected. So if you think of the way it's done before, you would send a botanist into the field to make an interpretation, and then they would provide a report. really you just depend on the trust that you have in that particular individual and their qualification to trust the result. But now you've got access to an entire layer of primary data that you can get reinterpreted if you need to, or verified. Then the interpreted information on top of it, and then the calculated items, and then the metrics, and then the insights that sits on the other end. So we can peel the onions. And so we've had like some interesting discussions with regulators and auditors that actually want to go a little bit deeper and be able to verify the data. Also importantly is like you can use that data, like even though for those projects we've associated to the WASA Trust methodology in terms of how we calculate those insights and metrics, you can use that data ultimately in however many ways you want. It all exists within the platform. And so it future-proofs a little bit that effort for Foresight. Mm-hmm. If the methodology changes a little bit down the line, we can always basically like a formula, mm-hmm. apply the formula differently to the data that was collected on the site.
Maybe just one very quick comment is that the platform that you've developed, Sylvain, is very powerful. Yes, some people that are not so familiar with, how do habitat maps look like, and so it is very just good to point them to that platform and just show them, these are the habitat parcels. This is where we surveyed, and it will be very good also to run reports, and just for reporting purposes, that platform will be extremely useful. But just to visualize what happened in the field, to put that in front of somebody in a screen, because when we talk to our investment managers and so on, these are very powerful tools that are there. Just click on that, and then you can see it. And it's very dynamic. So, and that is what we like at Foresight about that process as well.
And maybe on the cost as well, like more from a reduction, what we've observed from a Mozaic standpoint is that just by decoupling the data collection from the data interpretation, this is already like really significant cost saving that we can pass on to our clients. So to do like a habitat condition assessment, where today you can't do through satellite imagery alone, you need to send a certified skilled ecologist on site. We can, by just having them do the assessment remotely, we can lower the cost by 30 to 50%. And similarly for botanical surveys, which traditionally have been very expensive because there's not that many really good botanists around, and they have to travel generally from far to do the analysis and stay on site quite long. That's been huge savings because we have partnerships with world-class botany institute in the UK, but also in Europe, in Romania, where we started our work with rePLANET, and they've been able to analyze Scottish and English biome and vegetation entirely remotely, and obviously it's very, very cost-effective then.
When we buy a site, for example, we have an investment case. So there's a piece of land, and we think this is how we generate some uplift for our investors. And at that point, obviously, we do quite a thorough desktop analysis, but what we wouldn't send necessarily trained ecologists to site to do a proper assessment of what's on the ground. We do most of it is desktop based. So when we do that investment decision, we get approval from our investment committee, for example, and 2 years down the line, when we have all the reports in and Max has been to site and so on, the picture shifts slightly. And that means maybe initially we assumed or we planned 80% of that site. But now when all the survey results are in, we maybe think, oh, wait a minute, there's a few more habitat types that maybe are not suitable for tree planting. And so we need to convince the investment committee that it's actually still a good idea to go ahead with the planting proposal, but maybe tweak it slightly and focus on those habitats that we can't plant up, but we can increase the biodiversity uplift on these particular parcels of land. So the overall picture still looks very positive, but it is just maybe not as we assumed 2 years ago when we made that investment decision. And it is a very valuable process to have Max and his team on board to help us to make the right decision, what is best for, in the end, for the environment, and still satisfy those the investment decision that we made in the first place.
We're still in a divergent period of the market where there are many different types of frameworks, many different types of technology, which make things quite confusing for the buying perspective. And so you kind of have to take a leap of faith of the people that you're going to be working with. But that's a really critical and necessary step to de-risking some of the technologies that are being proposed and demonstrating that they work in real life context. So that role and being able to create that trust environment is super, super critical. And I think like Helge took a leap of faith on us, and Max like brought this as well. And then having like a really tight communication throughout the process, because there's a lot of like known unknowns and unknown unknowns throughout the process. And so we worked very closely with the team on the ground. We organized on the first day, or like on the beginning of the data collection process, a kind of like all hands on deck day at the Knockfell site, where Helge and his team were there. The local forestry team was there as well, and as well as myself. And we went through the process, like hearing the feedback from the data collector, making sure like we also being like we're in a position to be really, really responsive to any issues that might be happening. And I think this is really, really important because people have limited time. And when we're asking our client to participate in the data collection process, we need to make sure that this is as efficient as possible because it's part of the value proposition. And so in a period of like pilot and testing, we really were trying to iterate as quickly as possible with the Foresight team and the rePLANET team to improve the platform as we were moving on. And I think what we started with in April looked quite different than what we ended with the monitoring period in August. And as part of that open line of communication directly with the different parties involved. What I would also mention is we've got on the call here 3 of the organizations. So we talk about partnership and the power of partnership with 3. But in reality, to make this project happen, it was on the Foresight team, it was Foresight and the forestry team, which is another organization on site. We had rePLANET, obviously. We had Mozaic as kind of like the technology platform to coordinate everything else. But behind this, we had organizations like Carbon Rewild doing all of the bioacoustic analysis that we work with and coordinate with. We had Nature Metrics doing all of the meta-barcoding analysis for the project that we work with and coordinate with. And then we have all of the expert ecologists and botanists that have been doing all of the interpretation of the data coming through. That is also kind of another stakeholder group. So it's a lot of different organizations that need to be able to provide their input through the process at the right time. And so I think, again, having like really super structured governance, really understand like what is Mosaic role, what is rePLANET's role in the process, and then having that trust so we can communicate and provide feedback and iterate quickly has been quite important, I think. And what was really interesting from a collaboration standpoint with this project, and I think with the approach that we are taking through Mosaic and rePLANET, is that maybe usually more traditionally, Helge and the team from a Foresight perspective would come in, set their objective, then things would happen in a black box, and on the other end, they would get a report with some of the insights. In the way we are working on this project, it's collaborative throughout the life of the project, where the Foresight group and then the forestry team that was doing some work on site from step 2 was participating in the data collection process. And so the communication and proper governance and all of this stuff from a collaboration standpoint was super, super important. But it also meant that Foresight as a client was involved throughout the process and had full kind of like touch points from the collection of the data, then the interpretation, and then getting the right insights to make the right decision. So I think that was kind of like something quite unique about the way we work together.
Interesting point there, Sylvain, about just how many people were involved in delivering this. I actually gave a gave a presentation earlier in the week about kind of collaboration and used this as a case study as well. And I think I tallied it up, and there are over 60 different individuals and organisations involved in us delivering this, and that was just who I could think of. And so I think it was broader than that. So yeah, as Sylvain says, it looks like there were 3, but it was way more involved in all of this. And I think that's really key for the industry as a whole. The collaboration is really important at breaking down those silos, starting to speak the same language. We're all kind of from quite different backgrounds, and when we start talking, Sylvain was talking about things like APIs when I first met him. I had no idea what he was talking about. So it's all of those different things as well, and just learning how to communicate with each other is really key. I think there was also one thing as well, if you don't mind me coming in on the risk kind of factor as well. I think there are obviously all sorts of risks that we're facing at the moment as we're kind of, as we say, we're working in a pretty new area. But I think from my perspective, kind of sitting in a project development, sitting in kind of a project developer, the biggest risk is that we don't do this, is that we don't explore technologies and that we don't adopt these technologies, because we need these monitoring solutions and we need them now. I would probably say, and I think Sylvain, I'm sure, has had his frustrations with this, but we're a pretty old school organization. Actually, we like to be out on the ground. We want to be there. We want to be the ones that are counting the birds. We want to be the ones that are collecting the insects. And there's a slight resistance organizationally to the adoption of tech, just simply, and it's a kind of a lack of trust, I guess, in it. And it's a well, we've been doing it the old school way for a long time, and that's been fit for purpose. And I think one of the things that we've learned a huge amount, or I have learned a huge amount from Sylvain, is that no, tech is good. Let's use it to support us and bring us into the 21st century. And actually, it's the only way that we're going to solve for the huge amount of biodiversity monitoring that is required. So I think really the biggest risk, as I say, is that we don't start to adopt these technologies, and that people give up on these kind of technologies, because then we're really screwed at that point as well. So